Everyone claims to make the best burger, but let me show you the real best way, and it's probably a lot easier than you think. So there's really not a lot to making a great burger. This is one of those cases where keeping it simple is actually the best way to go. What really makes a great burger is not the ingredients that you use, but the technique. So today we're gonna go through my two favorite techniques, both of which will produce an incredible burger. And the best part, you can make them in a matter of minutes with nothing more than just a sturdy spatula and a cast iron pan. So let's get into it. So believe it or not, all you need for this recipe, in addition to your ground beef, is some salt and pepper. When choosing your beef, really the only factor you need to consider is that it contains at least 20% fat content, because that's going to leave you with a nice juicy burger as the fat renders out. Obviously you can spend as much as you want for a higher quality beef or even grind it yourself, but that only makes a marginal difference and it's not really worth it in my opinion. I'm just using your basic 80-20 ground chuck here, nothing special, and the result is still going to be incredible. So you really don't have to spend a lot here. So like I mentioned, we're gonna cover two different methods, both of which are actually pretty similar. I prefer a thinner diner style burger, so that's what we're gonna make today. Now there's really three factors that define these methods that really set them apart from the rest. The first and probably most important factor is that we want to handle the beef as little as possible to make sure it doesn't become too compacted. For a really tender, juicy burger, you actually want it to be pretty loosely packed so you get a lot of little crevices and the burger just falls apart as you bite into it. We want a tender texture rather than the stiff, chewy burger that you would end up with if you pack down your meat. This is one of the biggest mistakes people make, and doing this alone will have a huge impact on the quality of your burger. The second factor is that we only want to season the outside of the burger rather than all the way through. This will again ensure that we get a nice tender result. You'll find that if you season the beef before forming the patties, you'll end up with a stiffer, chewier patty, which isn't going to be quite as desirable. Finally, the third factor is to maximize the amount of surface area in contact with the pan. This way we get as much browning and flavor in the patties as possible. And that's also a reason why I like to do the thinner burgers. It's almost like the whole patty just is covered in a crispy crust, which just makes it so delicious. So keeping these three factors in mind, let's cook some burgers. So this first method is the one I usually use, and it just involves creating a loosely packed 2-ounce burger patty, seasoning it with kosher salt and freshly ground black pepper, and placing it into a ripping hot cast iron pan or other heavy bottomed pan, using a nice sturdy spatula to prevent it from falling apart. Now, contrary to what you might have been told in the past, you actually want to use your spatula to press down on the patty and smash it into the pan. This is where we're really going to create that nice browning. A lot of people tell you never to press the patties down because you're going to squeeze the juices out, and this might be true after the patty starts to cook, but if you do it right after you place it in the pan, the fat hasn't rendered out yet, so there's no juices to squeeze out. It'll only improve your burger. Anyways, after that, just season the other side with salt and pepper, and let it cook until nicely browned all over, about 1 to 2 minutes on each side. When you flip the patty, make sure to press down hard with your spatula to make sure that you get all that nice browning up from the pan. You don't want that to stick to the pan because you want that nice brown crust on your burger. The nice thing about this method is you don't have to worry about the inside being undercooked because the burger is so thin that by the time it's browned on both sides, it'll be plenty cooked through. So now let's move on to method number 2. Now this one is pretty similar to the first, but in this case you'll start by taking your 2 ounces of beef and forming it into a loosely packed ball. Again, you'll season it with kosher salt and freshly ground black pepper and place it into your ripping hot pan. Now this time, you want to right away take your sturdy spatula and press down on the patty to flatten it out as much as possible. Again, it's important to do this quickly because you don't want the burger to cook too much before you can get it into its desired shape. So with this technique, you don't end up with quite as loosely packed and tender of a burger, but you get a lot more of that browning and you get a really, really crispy crust. So it really just depends what you prefer. Like I said, I prefer the first method because I really like that tenderness and you still get some good browning, but if you really just like the crispiest, brownest burger possible, then I think the second method is the one for you. Again, you want to make sure to press down with some force as you flip the patty, especially using this technique because you're getting a lot of browning and you want it to stay on the burger, not on your pan. So here you can see a side-by-side comparison of the two techniques. The patty on the right is the smashed burger and the patty on the left is the loosely packed one. You can see the smashed burger formed a browner, crispier crust, but the loosely packed patty, although it's not quite as brown, developed a juicier, more tender texture. So it really just comes down to personal preference when deciding which of these two methods you like to use. So now let's talk about assembling the burgers. Always make sure to toast your buns. I like to use the same pan that I cook the burgers in, so you can add a bit of butter if you want, but you should have enough fat rendered out from the burgers that you don't even need to add anything. Now I'm just gonna spread on some of my special sauce, which I made by taking about a cup of homemade mayonnaise and adding 1 tablespoon of mustard powder, 2 tablespoons of ketchup, 1 teaspoon of garlic powder, 2 teaspoons of paprika, and a pinch of salt. I use my own homemade mayo here, so if you guys are interested in learning how to make that, make sure to let me know in the comments below. But that's obviously not required. You can just use any old mayo if you want to make this sauce. Anyways, in addition to that, just add whatever other toppings you like. Personally, I like to add some sliced onions and pickles, and that's about it. I like to keep it pretty simple. One thing I would recommend though is adding your toppings on the bottom of your burger. It just kind of creates a more stable structure compared to having them on the top. I'd also recommend slicing the onions lengthwise rather than cutting them into rings, just because you can actually take some of the bite out of the onions by doing it this way. It just has to do with the way the cells in the onion are aligned. So when you cut them this way, you're not bursting as many of the cells as you would if you cut them into rings the typical way. Now I'll just place the patties and cheese on top of that. It's important to use American cheese here because there's really just nothing that melts quite like it. You might think that using a quote-unquote better quality cheese like a nice cheddar would be preferred because it would have more flavor, but you just wouldn't be able to get that same melted texture that the American cheese provides. So for a classic burger, using American cheese is essential. So there you go.